The 2012 Dredd movie, directed by Pete Travis and starring Carl Urban, was pretty much the Dredd movie we deserved and not the 1995 Stallone version. I know people might disagree with that, but it is what it is. Though the movie earned critical praise, it struggled at the box office, and that's probably why no sequel was made. However, we did get a comic book sequel in 2018, Dredd: Final Judgment, a 2-issue comic by Arthur Wyatt, Alex DeCampi, and Henry Flint. The story not only expanded on the lore of Judge Dredd in Mega City 1, but it introduced a bunch of super cool villains that gave Dredd a run for his money, and in this video, we're going to explore the 2 issues in great detail. But before we begin, please consider hitting those like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos in the future. So now, let's begin. Issue 1. 4 Missing Techs. The comic starts in the northern sector of Mega City 1 at around 8 in the morning. As usual, crime was prevalent, but at the time, the crime levels were slightly down, barring the usual hotspots. Judge Dredd was in hot pursuit of a suspect. There was an outstanding APB for this man called Mike Matches McGee, who was wanted in connection with a fire the previous night at the Jimmy Somerville Tower. Dredd informs Control that he has the suspect in sight, but Mike throws a makeshift Molotov cocktail at Dredd, which surely pisses him off. Dredd orders him to surrender since there was nowhere left to run, but Mike replies, no point in running, the world is going to end in fire, can't outrun the flames. After saying these strange, enigmatic words, Mike sets himself on fire, the first suicide. Meanwhile, a group of 8 girls, same age, same class, they throw themselves from the terrace of a high-rise. Before doing so, they were almost chanting stuff like, "He is coming. The one law, the judge of all things, he is coming." It may have seemed that these 2 incidents weren't connected, but just as Mike was breathing his last and the girls jumped to their deaths to join this so-called him, Mike said, "Hello, girls." After the mass suicide, several judges reached the scene of the crime, but they could find no reason for them to have done it. No one forced them, there was no cause, no pattern. The public also started to gather, but Dredd pushed them away, not without pointing his gun at them. Nevertheless, he regretted it because he knew he shouldn't snap at citizens like that, even those who overstepped the line. He also remembered something Anderson once said to him. Anger could be a useful weapon, but without control, it was nothing. And right about then, to break his chain of thought, Judge Dredd gets a call from Control asking him to board a VTOL, basically a chopper, which was set to take him to Tech 21, the Justice Department's Advanced Technological Research Facility. He asked Control what he should do about the jumpers, but Control said that his presence was needed more at Tech 21, and moreover, they were going to appoint rookie Judge Conte to take care of the suicide situation. And Conte had previously worked with Dredd, which meant that she was capable enough to take care of this while Dredd went to Tech 21. Dredd boards the VTOL and heads to Tech 21. Something wrong had happened here, something very unusual. The science guys here were actually trying to harness energy from another dimension which had been plagued by entropy and by death. More on that later. As of now, we'll tell you what Dredd was briefed about. After the Great War that destroyed most of the Earth, the world was having to ration energy as much as they could. Every resource needed to be endlessly recycled and every watt of energy reused, and that's where Project Proteus came in. It was designed to solve this problem. 7 techs had arrived that morning to work on Project Proteus, but there was just one entrance, and no one else went in or came out. When Dredd, escorted by the techs, arrived inside the room, he saw that only 3 dead bodies remained. Where were the rest? More importantly, the deaths looked absolutely natural, kind of like a heart attack with no secondary injury. But their eyes were open and enlarged as if something horrifying shocked them to death. In a day of strange suicides and stranger disappearances, the Tech 21 situation had more than met the eye. Meanwhile, one of the girls who had jumped, she came back to life. And on the wall behind her was graffiti done in blood which said, "You cannot kill what does not live." Kinda sounds like what is dead may never die, but anyways, we're not here to discuss Game of Thrones. The whole thing is proof enough that something supernatural was at play, and Judge Dredd had just moved beyond sci-fi enemies to supernatural ones. Judge Dredd finally asks his colleague what it was that the techs were researching, and Jansen explains that they were attempting to harness extra-dimensional energy sources. They discovered another dimension overlapping our dimension. It actually existed between the extra space that the subatomic particles of our dimension were no longer using. It also had reached entropy, so one could say that it was a dead world, for lack of a better word. If one opened a portal between the 2 dimensions, there would be a massive energy transfer from our world to the dead dead one until both the systems had reached equilibrium. In this case, that meant entropy for both worlds. But if one could open just the right kind of portal, you could harness the force of that potential transfer like a hydroelectric dam but with quantum particles. Among the 7 techs who worked on the project, the 3 who died were Preeti Anand, Mary Wu, and Robert Gonzalez, while those who were missing were Patrick McIntyre, Oluremi Oluwood, Holiday Jones, and Sidney Diath. If you're a Dredd fan, you may have heard that name, Sidney Diath. Either way, you'll soon get to know the importance of who Sidney was. After confirming that the 4 missing judges didn't just leave the room to get a coffee or a bagel, he concludes that they actually went missing, as if disappeared into thin air. To learn more about what he was dealing with here, Dredd goes to another tech division employee named Penny Maxwell. She had been working on the project for a while, but then she chose to stay off of Project Proteus. Dredd finds Maxwell at her home in Gary Lineker Garden. It was around 2:30 in the afternoon. The building was once a fashionable block, but now it was more of a derelict. The place smelt like rancid dreams and rotten garbage, as if shit exploded here. Seeing Dredd at her door, Maxwell immediately figured out that something happened at the lab. We now learn the real reason why she left the project. The energy from the other dimension was rotting her skin away, black spots all over her body, but she was more than cooperative with Dredd and explained everything he needed to know. She also explained that Patrick and Remy, 2 of the missing tech guys, were having strange episodes like nightmares and hot flashes. After getting all he wanted, he asked Maxwell a simple question: could anyone survive going through the portal? And Maxwell tells him that it must be nearly impossible since the physics of that world could be completely different from ours. She warns Dredd that no matter what they do, they shouldn't open the portal. While leaving the place, Dredd noticed a horribly rancid smell coming from apartment 4006. It was registered under the name of Eddie Vader, a man who belonged to a cult called the Locked, who believed that they could conquer fear and achieve nirvana by never leaving their homes. He breaks into the home to find Vader on his couch, a video game console in his hand, and his body rotting post-death, so much so that gas oozed out of his mouth. But guess what? The man came to life, and quite mysteriously, he just went through his own TV as if it were a portal. Meanwhile, we learn that somehow the 4 missing techs were the ones spreading death across Megacity 1, and they were all reporting to Sidney Diath. The barrier was finally weakening between the dead world and our world. Maybe a few thousand more deaths and the dimensions would merge. Judge Dredd called Control immediately after the Vader incident and tells them that he needed backup immediately. He realizes that instead of trying to figure out where the 4 missing judges went, he should have been focusing on what came back. But Control tells him that there were bigger problems at hand right now. Backstory time. We learn what happened at the lab that day. So, when he was growing up, Sidney often visited his aunt who owned an exotic animal, a domestic short-haired cat. It was a crotchety old thing, always hissing and scratching at him, but then one day it stopped eating, stopped cleaning itself, curled up in a corner, and began to die. At this point, Sidney became fascinated with it. He started visiting the cat every day, and so it was that he witnessed the beast's final moments. The cat transformed into something else, with the same volume and mass, something more properly at peace with the universe, and Sidney envied it. Sidney was thinking about that cat that very morning. Sidney once told Jones about the cat after a few drinks, about how the quelling of its existence reminded him of the final entropic state of the dead parallel universe they had discovered. Anyways, they went on with the project and they were gonna take macroscopic readings that day, but the portal lost its stability. And then, suddenly, he experienced a sense of being at peace with the universe quite unlike anything he had before. All processes complete, all equations solved, everything at its final resting state. Sidney went through the portal and into the dead world. Meanwhile, the judges were facing mass shootings, arson, outbreaks like Ebola, aggravated eldercide, and much more. When Dredd reaches one of these sites, an explosion, and the first issue comes to an end, leaving Dredd's fate unknown. Don't worry, he's probably fine. Issue 2. The 4 Dark Judges. Dredd somehow manages to find his senses, only to find that the explosion was caused by Mike, who had come back from the portal, but now had immense pyrokinetic powers. Dredd manages to put him down. Beneath the hovering buildings, the air felt wrong, not just cold, but like the opposite of warmth. Like the heat was being drawn out of his body. Even the sound of Judge Zutter's voice felt wrong, oddly muted as he called out. He was facing the undead body of one of the girls who had jumped from the building in that mass suicide at the beginning, but this girl's body was now possessed by Sidney, and as for Vader, his body was being inhabited by Patrick. Yeah, Vader was back from the dead too, but not as himself. He tells Sidney that Judge Fire lost his body, but Sidney wasn't worried, confident that he would find another one. By now, Sidney killed Zutter, took his helmet, and proclaimed that their time had already come, and no matter what Judge Dredd or the entire Justice Department did, nothing could stop them. The sky above was like a dark mirror, a mockery of the city made foreign by strange geometry, yet recognizable in its humanity. Dredd almost felt the weight of it all pressing down on him as it descended. Dredd tried to contact Control, but he got no response and assumed that the anomaly caused some sort of disturbance to the radio channels. Even the sound seemed deadened, and the screams of the crowd muted in the background. But then, video screens switched on and the cacophony began. It said, "Mega City 1 has fallen. The judges have no control. There is no peace but death. Heaven lies above you." The more that the people watched these screens claiming the fall of the judges, the more violent and crazy they went, as if they were trying to spread death across Mega City 1, across the length and breadth of it. So, Dredd went after the screens and began shooting down as many as he possibly could. The scene then shifted to the Hall of Justice. There was still no word from Dredd, and comms were blacked out across the entire sector, so there was no way of warning him what was coming. So, Psy Judge Anderson came up with a plan. She contacted him psionically. She asks him to clear out and get Zutter out if possible, but he informs her that Zutter was dead and currently in the dead world, the Mirror World. It turns out the Justice Department did in fact have a plan ready. They were going to sound an evac alarm and then get as many as they could out of the region before hitting the Mirror World with a rain of nukes. But Dredd remembered what Maxwell had told him, and he asks Anderson not to go ahead with the plan because the dead world was just absorbing energy from the real world and the nukes would only make it stronger. The only way to stop giving the Dark Judges energy was to stop using it, and Dredd asked Anderson to shut everything down and send in an aerial unit because he was going to bring in the perps responsible. When Anderson asks him how many he was bringing in, Dredd tells her that he was going to need 3 body bags. Clearly, he was in no mood to take anyone in alive or whatever they were at this point, but Judge Fire had returned by now in the body of a small child, a despicable sight. But Dredd corrected himself and told Anderson that now he was going to need 4 body bags. The 4 Dark Judges now had names: Fire, Mortis, Fear, and worst of them all, Judge Death. Dredd fought his dead world opponents with all his might, but they were 4, had superpowers, and our guy was alone. He was outnumbered but not helpless or inefficient. He fought back tooth and nail with all the might he could possibly gather. Dredd was touched by one of the judges and he started undergoing the same fate as Maxwell: withered skin and signs of the bubonic plague. With some effort, he managed to cut off 2 of the Dark Judges, but Sydney was still after Dredd. However, Dredd had managed to shoot off Sydney's arm, so that was a good thing. Dredd was now in a sorry state, but he was desperately trying to contact Anderson so that he could find out the location of the aerial unit and its ETA. But then he spotted Zutter's bike, the only way to escape. He wanted to get out of there and live another day to continue the fight, but then he found Zutter's first aid kit and used a few of the injections, probably pain relievers. By now, Judge Death left the body of the girl he was possessing and jumped right out of it in his true form. Dredd did all he could to fight off the situation and the Dark Judges, but he failed. He figured if he couldn't kill them down on Earth, he would kill them on the dead world. He informs Anderson about the same, and this time around, she managed to rebuild the psychic connection with Dredd. You might expect the land of the dead to be a castle of bones, human remains heaped high to mock the living, but humans always did like to overemphasize their own importance. Instead, the dead world was a thing of monstrous geometry, inhuman, hanging down through a gap in space in mockery of all normal physics. This place was dead. Nothing existed apart from the buildings, and even those were in a state of decay. Dredd got into one of the tallest buildings of Mega City and reached the top, where the dead world and our world met. No matter how many bullets Dredd fired from his trusty gun, the Dark Judges didn't seem to go down, and even if he destroyed their bodies, they would simply get themselves another because what does not live cannot be put to death, right? Dredd once again tries to contact Anderson and they build a connection. He tells her about an anomaly he saw, a light in the distance on the dead world, but he got to it in no time. She explains that the energy swarming around him is the energy from their dimension. It's looking for a use, and when Dredd has a clear desire and an intent, the energy will bend to his will. Now that sort of evens the odds and gives Dredd a real shot at winning this thing against the Dark Judges. In the dead world, will was the tool through which one could use the energy, so the stronger the will, the more power one has. And as far as will was concerned, Dredd has no dearth of it. Soon, Dredd found Tech 21 in the dead world, and Anderson figures that it was the bridging point between the two worlds. The bodies of the 4 missing techs must be acting as anchors that Sydney was using to bridge the 2 dimensions together. Anderson, with the help of her colleagues, manages to open the portal once again so that the 4 remaining techs could be brought back, which would end this thing once and for all. She does that and asks Dredd to jump in with the 4 techs, but he can't. Sydney had acquired hundreds of bodies and amalgamated them together. If Dredd didn't stop Sydney, everything would be lost. So he lets the tech reach home, and he himself stays on the dead world to stop Sydney. The portal closes, the 4 missing techs are back, but Dredd remains in the dead world, a grim end to a fascinating story. Unfortunately, that's all we got for this tie-in, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on it, especially that ending. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.